getting us started.
Yeah, welcome everybody to TMAC today. I'll start off with our opening statement. So give me a minute to read that, and then we'll dive in. It is Thursday, March 18th, and it is 12 p.m. This meeting will be conducted entirely via electronic means on March 11th, 2021, in accordance with Utah Code 52-4-2074. I determined that conducting meetings of the Provo City Transportation and Mobility Advisory Committee with an anchor location, such as the Community and Neighborhood Services Conference Room, presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present there. These are the facts upon which I have made this determination. The World Health Organization has classified novel coronavirus disease, aka COVID-19, as a pandemic. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention state that COVID-19 is easily spread from person to person between people who are in close contact with one another. State Public Health Order 2021-5 addresses the ongoing COVID-19 public health emergency and establishes minimum standards to address the unique circumstances in different locations. Utah County is currently listed as having a high level of coronavirus transmission as determined by the state's transmission index metrics. Physical distancing measures will be difficult to set up and maintain in the Provo City Community and Neighborhood Services Conference Room and other meeting rooms. The meeting will be available to the public for live broadcast and on-demand viewing on YouTube at youtube.com/user/Provo Channel 17 and Facebook at Provo Channel 17. All right, thanks everybody. I'll just walk through and do introductions real quick. So I'm Clancy, TMAC Chair. From TMAC, we've got Joy McMurray, Vice Chair. Thanks for being here, Joy. And Jim Hamela, TMAC member. Thanks for being here, Jim. And Laurie Urquiaga, member and our Planning Commission representative. And also we'll welcome Dave Harding, who just stepped away, who's our council representative. Thanks for being here, Dave. We'll also welcome staff and everyone else for joining us. Thanks for joining us. As Robert kind of mentioned, our agenda is pretty full. And I know, Jim, you need to jump out right at 1, and it would be helpful if I could do that as well. So before we jump in, Robert, are we expecting to need to vote on any of the items today? I'm not aware of any votes, but
I don't think that any votes are necessary unless, like, on item 1, if you want to, if the committee wanted to, send some sort of support or recommendation or things like that, you're welcome to do that. But mostly just informational today. Okay,
cool. So I'm going to try to move us along maybe more than I usually do, just so we can cover everything. So let's go ahead and dive into item 1, the Joaquin Parking Permit Program.
Okay. And Dave, you should be set up to be able to share your screen. Perfect.
Okay. I don't know. Can you see?
Yeah, we're seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. All right. Start my timer. I'm going to try to move through this quickly, but this is something that we've been working on. I've been working on actively for a couple of years now, so I'm excited to get some feedback from TMAC and see, get some feedback. So, Joaquin Parking Solutions. Why are we even talking about this? Why does Joaquin need a parking solution? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? I think that's an important thing to do, is to really define the problem. We define the problem as excessive demand for free on-street parking that negatively impacts quality of life. What are the negatives of this excessive demand for free on-street parking? Partly it impacts convenience, and that sounds superficial, but it's not. I mean, this really is a quality of life issue. It is unpredictable and frustrating for the residents who live here. It's also a safety concern. We've seen blocked sidewalks, blocked crosswalks, driveways, fire hydrants, intersections, all of these things that impact the safety. as well as environmental concerns, both for air quality, but also if people are driving around in circles looking for those parking spaces, it's also just negatively impacts the environment of the neighborhood, the feel of the neighborhood, the livability. Also, we've noticed, our planning division has noticed negative impact on development. Here in this picture, we have some homes in the background there, and you can kind of see cars parked out in front, cars parked on the side. You can imagine if there's 8 people that live in one of these homes, and there's 3 off-street parking spaces there. 5 of them are out on the street. A developer may want to come by and buy a couple of these homes and put the property together and build a larger complex that could house more people. But we would require them to provide sufficient off-street parking for everyone who lives there. And that's not the current case in this situation. And so it's more expensive for someone to try to redevelop. And we are basically subsidizing the worst offenders as far as the landlords who are most dependent on on-street parking. We've done some surveys, and these surveys across Joaquin show that 85% believe that there is a problem. And if you look at people responding from North Joaquin, that goes over to 90%. 60% of those surveyed report having trouble finding an open parking space either daily or several times a week. So there's fairly strong consensus on the problem. We have not found much consensus anywhere on the solution to these problems. Everyone agrees that there's a problem. Everyone has a different idea of how it should be solved.
Dave, are you open to questions, or would you rather we wait till the end?
I'm open for questions.
I'm just curious, when you're talking about residents and the survey, are you including short-term residents in that and student populations, or mostly long-term residents?
Yep. Yes, the answer is yes. And okay. even some people, we opened that survey up to everyone, asked them to identify themselves and how they use it. But we even had some commuters, some people that live outside of Joaquin that were coming in.
Okay, thank you.
But that was a small group compared to the total. And I'd be happy to share the actual results with TMAC if there's interest there. So here's a newspaper clipping, which I find fascinating. We've done a lot of these presentations, and I've usually just flash this on the screen, but I think for this group, I think you might find it almost as fascinating as me. It comes from 1968, so 53 years ago, if I do my math right. Let me just read through it. The Provo City Commission, we had a commission back then, not a council, but it's equivalent to the council, has approved the recommendations of the city's Committee on Rental Housing and Off-Street Parking, and has set June 10th as the date to begin enforcement of the law banning overnight parking on city streets. If I didn't tell you the date, I mean, this really could have been from 2 years ago, and think about that as we go through this. The committee was appointed some time ago to study the parking situation and rental housing problems of the city, and recently made a report to the city containing 8 proposals. Same kind of problems we're dealing with now. The city has now adopted 8 of the recommendations, all 8 of the recommendations, which include post appropriate areas on the perimeter of BYU in an effort to regulate daytime parking and encourage parking in parking lots instead of the street. So commuter parking right next to BYU was a problem back then. Ask BYU to register all student cars and encourage those who prefer not to buy an on-campus permit to park in the parking spaces provided by their landlord. Ask BYU to include parking spaces as a strict requirement for approved renting to students with cars. The contract should be signed and based upon the fact that the landlord be required to furnish the parking to those with cars. Ask BYU to provide a list of housing that has parking available and a list of housing not providing parking for those for the use of students seeking accommodations. Enforce the 2 to 5 a.m. parking restriction. Give the citizenry plenty of warning before the June overnight parking enforcement, now on the far right. Encourage cooperative parking situations in blocks when it is possible and agreeable to owners. I hadn't seen this article, but as we were brainstorming as a parking committee, like what are some solutions? This is one that we talked about. Hey, we've got business parking lots and they need that space during the day. They don't need it overnight. Joaquin residents mostly need it overnight. So a way to share that. That was an idea from more than 50 years ago. The problem is that when the street is free, then people aren't really willing to pay much to park in a lot. And so these business owners, they get all of the hassle of cleaning up after people, of what happens if people don't move their car in the morning, and all of that hassle with no market. There's no market to pay for that parking. Encourage the Board of Adjustments and other discretionary bodies, kind of like TMAC, to adhere strictly to codes as much as possible to avoid non-conforming uses and resultant problems. Basically, if people are going to build something, it needs to have sufficient off-street parking. In adopting the recommendations, the City Commission pointed out that the law forbidding parking on city streets from 2 to 5 a.m. has been on the books for some time, but it has not been enforced, which I don't know how often that kind of statement gets said in TMAC, but it happens quite often on the council. Right now, we do not have a law that forbids parking on the street from 2 to 5 a.m., but we do have still, and I think it's probably from this era, laws that say that that properties have to provide off-street parking stalls for every vehicle operated from the premise. Sometimes people have said that in relation to rentals, but that includes homeowners, that includes businesses. Any vehicle that's operated from a premise needs to have an off-street parking stall for it. Let's see, and I'm going to, because of the time, I'm going to end there. But anyway, I thought this was a fascinating thing, and sometimes it feels like we're coming up with novel solutions and then realize that these have been proposed 50 years ago. So here's just kind of a summary of past efforts. This highlights the one that was in the newspaper article, 2007. Those of you who've been around long enough may remember the talk about SCAMP, which I think is South Campus Area Parking something plan. It was passed. It was the law, and as it was being implemented, the public pushback was so strong that it was rescinded. And actually, let me write that second bullet point for the first effort, the one that was in that newspaper article. So, hey, everyone, June's coming. This is going to be enforced. Well, the public pushback was so strong that it was delayed and then eventually rescinded. So I think that was the end of the overnight parking ban in Provo. 2018, Joaquin neighborhood formed their own parking steering committee, put together a proposal, brought it to the city council, and I think they did it a second time in 2019, which I guess is technically the current effort. So the council felt that this is definitely a problem that we would love to tackle and resolve. And we are trying to learn from the mistakes of the past to see if, the fifth time is the charm, if we can learn from our mistakes. So we've done a lot of surveys, which I shared some of the results earlier. We've used focus groups. We've had shareholder meetings. We've really tried to be data-driven. Let me add one in here. We also want to look at what technology, what tools we have now that we didn't have in the past, and see if that might be able to what makes this practical. And then best practices. We really tried to be informed. And here's one example, Donald Shoup. Hopefully most of you have heard that name before. you could say literally wrote the book on parking and management of on-street parking. And he, quote from him, just because the driver doesn't pay for parking doesn't mean the cost goes away. And he recommends 3 basic reforms. Get the right price for curb parking. I call it on-street parking. So that should be the lowest price the city can charge while still maintaining 1 or 2 open spots. Make this politically feasible by spending all of the meter revenue and to add public services on the meter block. And 3, reduce all off-street parking requirements. Wouldn't that be nice if we had on-street parking functioning sufficiently, that managed sufficiently, that we didn't have to dictate to people what they have to have off-street, because it's in their own best interest to provide the right amount of off-street parking for their program. We're just not there yet. So staff, and I think this is a couple of years old now, but staff put some really good effort into defining the problem and again, giving us the data we need to make data-driven decisions. So they looked at a variety of sources and determined how many people could live in Joaquin now, based on dwelling rental licenses and those kind of things, and came up with 18,000 people potentially could be living in Joaquin. And then they counted every single parking stall that was there. And I'm jumping down closer towards the bottom. There's 14,000 parking stalls, 18,000 potential people, 14,000 parking stalls. Of that, over 11,000 are off street, and about 2,800 are on street. But they also counted not only parking stalls, but how many were occupied. And this is, 2 to 4 a.m. They're out in the middle of the night as ninjas stalking around, and counting these stalls. And what they found is about 79% of the off-street parking is full, and about 73% of the on-street parking. So there is some space there, but if you guys are up on your transportation, just like a road, a freeway, flows great up until about 80% of the capacity, and then after you get above 80%, the performance drops significantly as you go up. These are numbers that are neighborhood wide, and there are some areas that really don't have a problem, and then there are other areas that have significant problems. And then if you average that all out, these are the numbers we get. And then we also talked about how some of this off-street parking is not necessarily, most of it is not publicly available. And so there may be some places that have plenty of overnight parking off-street, but no one else can use it, and there's really no motivation for them to make it available. All right, so what are we trying to achieve? And this is I think is important that we drive this message strongly to the public. We are not here to penalize students. We are not here to make money. The only reason that we're talking about this is we want to reduce the frustrations and improve the quality of life of the people who live here. It needs to be predictable for the residents. We want to encourage the efficient use of off-street parking, and I've kind of alluded to that a couple of times, to kind of align the incentives and align the interests so we can get better efficient use of off-street parking. We want to stop encouraging cars. We're basically subsidizing people, making it cheaper and easier to bring their cars. We want to stop discouraging redevelopment. I talked about that earlier. And we have committed that any program that we do needs to be financially self-supporting. But we also feel that this should not be too difficult to do, and there's a lot of ways to do that. But that it does need to be self-supporting. We've had recommendations. Well, the city just needs to build a parking garage in Joaquin neighborhood, so everyone who wants to park there can park there. That's not going to be financially self-supporting. Okay, so after a couple of years of working on this and just kind of feeling a bit at an impasse, the committee took a step back and said, okay, let's table everything we've talked about and just kind of take a fresh look at this. Start asking some basic questions. Why don't we just enforce the current laws? The current law being every car that's operated from property needs to have an off-street stall for that. And if we were to enforce that, on-street parking would not be a problem. On-street parking, let me just jump in, and I know I'm taking some time getting to the point, but on-street parking should be a convenient. It should be it's a good thing. It should be a convenient thing. It should be there's a word that I'm blanking on, but just it should be fun. It should function to allow flexibility for visitors to come in. If you've got someone making a delivery, they should be able to park on the side of the street. If you've got guests coming over, they should be able to park and conveniently go there. So we want on-street parking to be convenient. We want it to be an amenity for the people who live here. It's just it's being overused, and so that's breaking down. And so it could function like that if every car that is operated from a premise has an off-street stall, but that is very difficult to enforce. The amount of manpower that we would need to get on top of this problem, and then you could enforce on one, but as you go on to the next one to try to enforce upon them, then what keeps the first one from going back to this. So we've looked at this, and it really is infeasible to try to just brute force enforce that law. All right, well, why don't we just ban overnight on-street parking? That's not the worst idea in the world, but as we saw in the past, it wasn't politically feasible. And then it still wouldn't function if you have someone that's staying for a week from out of town, and they could not park on the street, and you lose that flexibility. If an average resident lives in a house for 50 years, and 8 of those they have more cars than they have off-street stalls for, they can kind of use the on-street as flexible space, and it doesn't become a problem if that's kind of the average. But if every house has 3 extra cars that they can't park off street, and then it causes the problem. But if we just banned overnight parking, it would be onerous on a lot of people, and we lose a lot of that flexibility. All right, so why don't we just allow parking by permit only, and only area residents can purchase the permit? This would address the commuter problem, people that are parking just on the outskirts of BYU and walking in, people that park around the ride stops and catch the ride in. It would address, I think at the Avila school has some daytime problems, but it really only addresses maybe 5% of the overall walking parking problem. The biggest aspect of Joaquin's parking problem is due to the residents themselves, not from outsiders. And so, yes, we could do this. We could charge everyone $15 to get a permit, but then they still couldn't find a parking spot, even with paying the permit. So it doesn't really solve anything. And if you go back to the goals that we were trying to achieve, it really doesn't achieve any of them. All right, why don't we just charge for overnight on-street parking? That was a question that we asked, just kind of in this brainstorm, like, what if we did this? What if we did? Well, what if we did this? And we thought about it for 5 minutes and couldn't come up with a good reason not to do this. It actually is, there's a lot to like about this. And so after discussing a lot of different things or whatever, right now, the parking committee's recommendation is exactly this. So our proposal is paid on-street parking with no permits. It could be applied everywhere in Joaquin, and we could also apply it just in the areas where parking demand is above some threshold, and that might be 80%. After it's above 80%, then the residents on that street could ask for it. And if it's above 90%, even without asking, we're just going to implement it. But it's flexible that way. We could start with overnight, and then expand it to the day if necessary. But really, most places in Joaquin, if everyone had to find a place for their car overnight, then during the day there wouldn't be a problem. The price of parking would be market demand. So it's dynamic. It could change, every quarter or every month. And with our license plate readers, let's probably get into too much detail, but the license plate readers, as they drive around, they're constantly counting how many people are there, how many cars are parked there, and it already knows how many legal spaces there are. So every time, just while we're out enforcing, we're getting this data back saying, hey, this street is at 80% capacity, this street's at 40% capacity, this street is at 100% capacity. And so we can take that data in and then adjust the parking price dynamically. And the idea is the parking, the price is as low as possible, that makes it so that there's going to be a free space or two along that stretch. So for example, in an area that doesn't have a lot of parking demand, it might be 25 cents for 24 hours. So, if you want to park your car out there, it's going to cost you roughly $8 a month to do that, which is a pretty reasonable price. If you have guests that come in for a week, they could park on the street and it would cost you less than $2 for them to be there for a week. But obviously, if we did that everywhere, places where there's high demand, everyone would want to do that for that price, and we would still have that parking congestion. So the price would be more expensive in areas with a higher demand. It might be 25 cents an hour. And so if someone parks there, say 14 hours a day, because that's probably about average, now it's going to cost you closer to $100 a month. And if that price is sufficient that it convinces some people to not park on the street anymore, then that alleviates the congestion. If it convinces too many people and there's lots of open space, then that price would come down. If that $100 a month is insufficient to convince people to park somewhere else, then that price will need to continue to go up. We do want this to be very convenient. We want this to be a great experience where people they see up front how much it's going to cost them, and then they can make these choices. So some of the things that we would build in this, we're proposing the first half hour is free. So if you're just making a quick delivery, dropping off some cookies, going in to say hi, picking someone up, all of that can be done in the first half hour. First half hour is free. You don't have to worry about payment. All of this could be done through a Park Provo app that at least some efforts have been made so far to find a vendor or to develop it. I've seen some working prototypes. But also, I don't know if you're like me, sometimes you go visit a place and they want you to download their app to, it's like, I'm going to be here for an afternoon. I'm never coming back. I don't want to load this up on my phone. There would also be a website that someone could go to make that payment, or even a phone number with friendly customer service. That was an option with several of the vendors that we talked with. Also, things like the first offense receives a warning. Again, this is not about generating revenue. This is about managing that on-street parking. And so if someone comes in, they don't see the sign, they park there, they're going to get a warning first. Now, we feel that that's a really good balance, because then it helps people not be upset that they didn't understand or whatever. But also, if someone's going to live there for a semester and want to park there every night, that's not going to do much to, it's not something that they can abuse. So we really feel like that would address that. But really, we want this to be a convenient, pleasant experience for everyone. And all of a sudden I lost, there we go. All right, that is the end of my presentation. Questions or really feedback, we'd love to hear.
Thanks so much for this, Dave. This is really interesting and informative. That newspaper article from, what was it, 50 years ago? Like
53, yeah.
You could post that on Facebook today and nobody would know the difference. If you wouldn't mind going back a few slides, this paid overnight parking proposal makes sense, but it would help me to see the other ideas again, just to understand how it's different from the other ideas real quick, if that makes sense.
So why don't we just enforce current laws?
Okay.
Why don't we just ban on-street parking?
Okay.
Why don't we just allow parking by permit? So basically allow every resident to buy a permit.
And then the next one, the overnight. Okay.
Yep.
So that permit one and the overnight one were the two I wasn't sure of. So the difference is it's not a permit. Anybody that shows up can pay to park there.
And permits you generally buy up front. So I'm gonna plot down my anywhere from 15 to 100 to whatever dollars up front, and now I've got that permit and I can park there for free, no incremental costs, as much as I want, whenever I want, because that's what that permit allows me to do. Where the on-street parking, I park, in that first example, every day that I park there, regardless of how many hours, or once I park there, I've got 24 hours, so I pay by that amount. But if I park the next day or the next day, I pay each time that I park there. If I'm gone, on sabbatical for a month or whatever, I don't pay any of that.
Thanks. That helps for sure. I definitely like the idea and can relate to and understand the need, because I live somewhat close to this neighborhood and went to BYU and experienced it. So yeah, I'm definitely supportive. I don't know, any others have thoughts or questions?
I have a question. What kind of technology are you going to use? Because, let's say you prepare, for example, and you drive a car. Are you going to have some equipment go there, like a parking, the stand and stuff? How do you manage this? Because unless your car's location is checked somehow, you can't. It's difficult to, for example, change demand and stuff. I mean, and the price changed due to demand and stuff. Yes.
Great question. And I should say that none of this we haven't selected a vendor. We haven't, so there's going to be some flexibility, different solutions will have different options, but conceptually, what this is just some old-fashioned signs placed on the block face that say, managed parking, whatever it says. It has a QR code there. It has information on how to, a QR code to either pay directly or to download the app. And then we use license plate readers. So basically.
Yeah, so constantly monitoring license plate number, because otherwise, I can set it up, but
yeah,
who's going to check?
Yeah. More than right. So we have license plate readers we have license plate readers on vehicles that drive around. And so if I'm a student, I get the app, I pull in, I pull up my app on my phone knows where I'm located. And so I say, start meter kind of thing, or whatever, but basically I now start paying for my parking. And so in my app, I've already put in my license plate number. And so immediately in the database, my license plate shows up. And so a half hour later, the parking enforcement drives by and it's checking every single one of those license plates. It reads my license plate. It says, is it in the database? Yes, it is. And so he just keeps on driving. If I don't know about it, or I choose just to gamble with it or whatever, I pull in, I don't register my license plate number. As he's driving by, it checks, and my license plate isn't in that database. And so I get a warning telling me that.
So to do that, it's just like a BYU's parking management, right now. So you have to hire someone who enforce that.
Yes.
So do you have budget to do that, or where does the money come from?
So yes, we already have parking enforcement. We already have the license plate readers. Now we might need more staff, and we'll just have to see how that plays out. But I'm actually kind of hopeful that this is a much more efficient way than enforcing right now, which requires 2 passes. If it's like a 2-hour parking, you have to drive through, and then you have to drive back, 2 hours later. And anyway, so there's actually a lot of efficiency to this. But with this parking demand, with people paying between 25 cents per day or 25 cents an hour, there will be revenue, and that will be used for that enforcement. Great questions.
Dr. Saito?
Yeah.
We have the same software BYU does.
Oh, okay.
So you know how BYU works. We can do the same thing.
Right. So
with it.
You already have enough budget to do it. So this is not a huge amount of extra cost to the city.
We're currently not doing this anywhere in the city, but we have the software where we could basically do this tomorrow. As far as additional staffing to bring something in and have more people going in and doing it would be a net increase. We will absolutely need more people to do it. But the revenue that we have should cover that cost.
Yeah, I was curious about that. I mean, technologically it works, but how you actually manage the program, it's a different question.
David, I have a question.
Yeah.
This is different than because you've taken a data-driven approach, so I've learned things here that runs counter to arguments that I've heard in the past. So as it's always been presented, as I've heard this in the past, the problem is people coming in from outside and parking in the area. And that's kind of one of the reasons that the parking permit thing was put in place, because one of the problems they thought they were solving is people driving close to campus and then walking to campus and taking all the stalls. So it's clear from your data that the overnight parking is either all of the problem or it's exacerbating the problem. So I want to make sure I understand the data. So it looks like there's so many spots being taken by overnight parking that there is not very much parking for people to park in when they are there visiting for any reason, maybe even parking there to walk onto campus. And so that's all new information for me, and I accept it. It sounds like you're going after the right problem because you've got the right data. How did you determine that it's not that other problem now with people driving in, parking their car? Because I know student behavior.
Yeah.
What data collection did you do to? Okay, I will say you do have a solution for that. If that's a problem, you're going to charge all day. So I get that. But when you were doing the data-driven study, how did you determine that it wasn't that type of a problem of people coming in from outside, that was the smaller problem? You said that verbally, but I didn't see it in the data.
Yeah, great question. And as I mentioned, there are probably 3 areas where it is.
Oh, it is a problem.
Daytime is a problem.
Okay. It is a problem.
But it may, once we solve the overnight problem, that might open up enough,
right?
That it's less of a problem. But yes, the big thing is we can, and up on 8th North, we plan even from the get-go that's going to be during the day will be managed as well. But the same approach can be done during the day anywhere that it makes sense, but still having the license plate readers and kind of that general approach is how we would tackle the daytime as well. But it really just comes down to, I mean, you can just watch a spot throughout the day, and if there's, as I mentioned, I think it's a Vila school there, they have a problem with all of their students coming in and parking on the street, and it causes quite a bit of grief for the people who live there. And it's pretty obvious. But then there's other places where it's tight during the day, and during the night, is when it's completely full. And so unless we think that there's commuters that are parking there overnight, I mean, it's just that's how we know.
Okay.
That.
Okay. My second is not really this problem. It's how we can use what you've learned for downtown. So in the past, we've talked a lot about the problem that no one wants to park and pay in a parking garage because the streets are free. Do you have anything that you've learned from this to give us some advice for downtown?
Downtown was actually where we started with this, but there were some difficulties. We needed some time to work on some aspects of it. And so we kind of put the downtown one on hold a little bit and shifted our focus to Joaquin. But we are very cognizant. We want to at least explore, and I think it's totally doable. But if the same app works in every place that we have a parking permit program or managed on-street parking, as downtown, as at the airport, as there's another one I'm forgetting, but it'd be nice if that was all through one interface and people could just download one thing. But this absolutely applies to downtown, particularly if we can get this to be an enterprise fund. So the money that we raise from parking is kind of earmarked for parking expenses. But we actually we want people to use those garages. So there actually should be a higher price for the on-street than there are for the garages. And if we manage all of that, then we can easily do that. And then we can use the money that comes from the people parking on the street to actually help pay for the off-street, the garages. And we can then incentivize, we can make it so an employee, right now we've got people that work on this block and they're told by their bosses, well, don't park on this block. We need the spots open for our customers, so go park on that block. And so that's what they do. But the people on that block park on this block. And if we could put the incentives right so people want to park in the garages, it makes financial sense to park in the garages and walk that extra block, because I'm going to be there for 8 hours when my customers are coming in every 30 minutes or so. We want those high turnover to be available. And so this approach absolutely aligns with, the parameters of the program are going to be different downtown, but the structure of this absolutely is applicable to downtown.
Okay, thanks.
Clancy, if there's time, I have a few questions too, or do we need to move on?
Let's say 2 more minutes for this topic, if that's okay with everybody.
Okay.
Yeah,
then I'll try to be fast. Dave, how would you mentioned that I really appreciated this presentation. I've learned a lot as well. You said that in the past, political pushback has killed past efforts to make changes. I can hear my college roommates right now saying in my mind, they're going to charge the most vulnerable people, the students who are already the poorest, and now they're charging us for parking. How would you respond to that?
This is market driven. And so right now, landlords are able to compete with landlords outside of this area on price because the on-street parking is subsidized. And so we're basically subsidizing that, and that allows the landlords to have higher rents. This kind of holds landlords responsible. They can't just say, well, we'll provide you the room and you go fight out in public for the parking. Now, if a landlord was forced by the city to build a great big parking lot that they can't fill because no one will pay for it, all of a sudden now there's an incentive for people to fill that. And if another one doesn't have any off-street parking, now they can't rent to people with cars, or they have to figure out a business that they can secure some parking for or whatever. But just to compete on that open market, they're going to have to lower their rents. And so this really they still have to compete with other places. And so it really should not add any costs, but we'll just have a better managed parking and a better experience for people. And again, incentive, if I already have a car that I bought in high school and I can park it for free, why not bring it? But if I am going to be charged $50 a month for it, maybe I'll just leave it at home and I'll take the bus. But that gives people those choices. They can make those choices for themselves.
If I have a couple other additional questions, would emailing you be the best way to move forward with that?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Happy to respond.
Thanks for this, Dave. It's really, really helpful. And I want to get to our item 2 at least before Jim has to jump off. But if you plan on staying, Dave, and we have more questions, maybe later in the meeting we'll go to them. If you need to jump off also, feel free. Thank you for the presentation and for being here. So I want to jump to item 2 now, the bicycle scooter traffic on Center Street, and just kind of a review of this item. We've been talking about our Center Street evaluation criteria and how we're going to rate and determine priority Center Street projects. And one of the gaps we haven't discussed a lot is how bicycles and scooters and other non-foot or non-four-wheeled transportation, well, sometimes there's four wheels, transportation fits on Center Street. And so I want to have a 10 or so minute conversation about that today to get us started on this topic. If anyone from the committee has immediate thoughts they want to share on this that they've had since last meeting, let's begin there. And then I've asked Bike Walk Provo to actually give a short presentation on their perspective and knowledge of bicycle and scooter traffic on Center Street. So first, anyone from TMAC, do you have any thoughts or ideas you've had on this topic since last meeting you want to share before the presentation? Nope, all good. Okay, cool. I'll turn the time over to Rachel then, I think, who's going to give this presentation. Is that right, Rachel?
Yeah, I think Austin has it ready. Yeah, I'll give it. And sorry if you hear, oh, can someone let me share my screen, please?
Clancy, after Austin goes, can I just do a short briefing on scooters?
Yeah, if we can, both groups, if we just keep these as briefly as we can, that would be appreciated.
Okay, thanks. I can share it now. So if you hear feedback from my mic, I'm on Center Street, so that's why it's kind of loud. So I apologize on that. Okay, I'll be quick. Hey guys, I am Austin Taylor. I'm the executive director of Bike Walk Provo. Bike Walk Provo is a nonprofit advocacy group that's been around about 10 years in Provo. And our mission is to advocate for street design and culture that makes it safe, convenient, and fun for all people to move around by bike or foot. And we've been involved in the Center Street discussion for quite a while. If you guys have, probably everyone here has walked across Center Street and experienced a near-death experience. This has been caught on camera a few times. This video went viral through KSL TV when someone was caught almost hitting a person on crutches walking across the crosswalk, and it activated discussion about why are we letting people be in this dangerous situation. This was about a year ago. And so since then, we partnered with the Downtown Provo Business Alliance to write and submit a letter that we sent with them to the mayor. And this letter had well over 100 signatories on it. And in the letter,
we've actually had pretty detailed discussion about this letter and these items already. Maybe you weren't aware of that.
Okay.
I'd let you know. Maybe save some time here.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, and in that letter, we proposed some very specific design changes, and this letter got some good press through a few local media outlets. And so we wanted to look at how we can plan for bikes on Center Street. So we had a few volunteers take 7 hours of their time during peak commuting hours to sit on Center Street and to interview people as they're walking past. Specifically, we stopped people that were cycling or taking scooters on the sidewalk, and we asked them these 4 questions. We said, why do you ride on the sidewalk? Second, did you know that it's illegal to ride on the sidewalk? Third, we asked, what can the city do to make you feel safe riding in the street? And then lastly, we asked them, would our proposed design make you feel safe in the street? And we showed them that design that we submitted in that letter that had raised crosswalks and sharrows. And we got responses from all these people. Primarily, the people who were biking on the sidewalk said that they don't feel safe in the street. They say that the drivers are driving faster than 15 miles per hour, which plays out in the data. And they said they feel intimidated. So we asked them, what can the city do to make you feel safe on the streets? Some people said, well, primarily the message that we heard was, we need to feel like we have a space. We need a designated space in the street because I get honked at or people are revving their engines at me, trying to get me to get off the street. And so I want a space that I can call my own. This was the count that we ended up with over half of people that are biking or riding scooters are on the sidewalk on Center Street, and just 44% in the street. A couple of years ago, we did a count and extrapolated the data through some engineering formulas and showed how many trips per year are on Center Street. So primarily people walk on Center Street, but there is a big segment of people that do bike on Center Street as well. Our recommendations to TMAC would be, given the data, given what we've heard from the people who are biking on the sidewalk, we should put pedestrians first in this area. And I know that you've committed to do that, and we applaud that. We should slow the cars down to 15 miles per hour. There are a number of ways to do that, but we think with raised crosswalks, you can both put pedestrians first and slow the cars down. And then third, like these people were saying when we interviewed them, you should make space to bike and scoot. And so a very simple way to do that is with a sharrow. When the street is just 15 miles per hour, it's completely safe to share the lane, and that's what we would suggest doing. So if you have any questions, we're happy to talk about that.
That's really helpful, Austin. Thank you. I have several questions, but maybe we'll let Javin take a few minutes here to share what you want to share, and then we'll start some discussion.
Thank you. As first, you can see this, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. This is just showing, this is a ride report from our scooter company. We have Super Pedestrian, which their scooters are named Link within Provo City. And this is showing how many riders we've had for roughly the last quarter or so. September, we had just almost 14,000 trips. January, a little bit of a dip, we're down to 3,800, but that's what you'd expect with the weather. Also, this is showing for December through February, all start and stop places where rides occur. And as you can see, I'm going to zoom in here. You can see that our downtown area, Center Street here, is heavily used with our scooters. Of course, Joaquin area is as well, but the downtown area is very scooters are heavily used down here. The heat maps I've seen also indicate the exact same stuff here. And we've had some preliminary discussions with Super Pedestrian on how can, when a user uses a scooter, they are aware that it's not legal to ride on the sidewalk. We have signs on Center Street that also say it prohibits from riding scooters on sidewalks. However, people still do, but it is ultimately their choice on what they decide to do. But we've been doing some beta testing. It's still preliminary on how they can try to slow a scooter down on the sidewalk, so that way you're more likely to ride on the street in certain areas that we really designate. And as Center Street is a pedestrian mall, that is one area that I would like to, but it's still in the beta processing. That is all I really had to present. If anyone has any questions.
That's really interesting and helpful, Javin. Thank you. Thanks, Laura. I see your message. Laura, if you have any thoughts you want to chime in, you could right now quickly. Otherwise, we'll catch you next month.
I didn't get a chance to chime in with the car proposal, and I do like that one. I really do think that it would be great to do to improve this bike, the active transportation in the downtown area. And one thing that has been brought up in Planning Commission a couple times, and I like it, I just don't know how practicable it is given the current construction, is to move the cars to go down to one lane maybe, and move the cars out of a little bit further away from the sidewalk and make them a barrier, so that there's a bike lane between the sidewalk and the parking that is protected from the traffic. And that's one proposal to be considered. I know it would be kind of costly because it requires reconfiguring planters and other kinds of things like that. but protected bike lanes, I think, are eventually where we're going to have to end up. And leaving that little bombshell in the middle, I'll jump out now.
Thanks, Laurie. I've thought about that too, so I appreciate you bringing it up. Thanks. And Jim, do you want to take a minute, since I know you have to jump out also?
No, I really don't have any additional comment to make. I appreciate all the presentations; they've been great.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
With that, I'll have to pass. I'll have to drop off. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I want to dive into this discussion now, and I'll start off with some of my thoughts. There's clearly a lot of demand for bicycle or scooter use on Center Street. I mean, it's not something we can ignore. But I feel like right now it is sort of ignored in a way because it's not legal on the sidewalk. And if you've been walking on Center Street or a downtown area and had someone scooter or ride past you, it is very uncomfortable. But in the lane, using the travel lane, in some ways there's two different perspectives. A lot of people will feel unsafe because cars are going too fast. I've also had the opposite experience where I've ridden my bike on Center Street and traffic's been very slow because there's a little bit of congestion, and I'm annoyed that I'm in a car line and a bike and I just want to go around all the cars, but everything's so tight that I physically can't. I can't get around the line of cars. So that's kind of two separate situations, and some of that depends on the user, who the cyclist is. You know, if it's a family headed downtown for something, they're more likely to feel unsafe probably, whereas a commuter cyclist might be more likely to experience what I just described. So that's what I've been kind of rolling around in my head. You know, do we need to talk about a protected bike lane and losing a lane of travel? Or do we just need to make more space for bikes so they can get around cars? Because that actually is legal for them to do when the light's red. I don't have a solution, but that's what's been rolling around in my head thinking about this.
I had a data question. I couldn't put it quite together, those two presentations. It appeared the scooter traffic is as large as the bicycle traffic. It said 77,000. I'm just trying to get the data right. It looked like it was 77,000 bicycle trips annually, and it looked like a similar, I didn't see enough data, but it looked like the scooter number was probably at least that big, or on that order. Because it was like 13,000 in September alone for the number of scooter trips.
We've had 40,000 scooter trips just between September and February, and I have more data before then, but I didn't add that up yet.
So do we think is the bicycle number right or wrong? Or are they about the same number? So I'm just trying to get to the bottom of the data.
Just from our counts on Center Street, about a quarter of people going past, quarter of that bike number is probably scooters.
But Javin, your scooter numbers are citywide numbers, right? They're not Center Street numbers.
Correct. But talking with Super Pedestrian, that is where they see the highest usage of scooters.
Okay, so we think it's about 25% scooter traffic on Center Street and about 3/4 bicycle.
That's what Austin suggested.
Okay. All right. Thank you for filling in that hole for me.
David, if you would like me to analyze this and get back to you at a later date, I could get you some updated information on scooters on Center Street.
It's kind of like the reason I'm curious, it's the same as the issue that the parking committee's found. What problem are we solving, right? Are we solving a scooter problem, or are we solving a bicycle problem, or both? I think it'd be really helpful to know the answer to that.
Well, do we need to separate them though? I mean, are they similar enough that we can treat them as the same, or are they functionally different and we should separate them?
One thing that I've noticed functionally different is the scooters are rented downtown and driven around, whereas bicycles aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a usage difference between the way the two are being used. The way I'm seeing scooters used a lot downtown is someone will get there, say they either drive there and park, or they come in on the bus train, whatever it's called, UTX, and then they get a scooter and they ride, they get around. Whereas the bicycles seem to be currently coming in from outside. So I think the usage model is different between the two currently. Now, we could put a bicycle rental program in, but we don't have one right now. So I think the usage of the two modes is different right now.
I had a question about, to your question, Clancy, do we treat bikes and scooters similarly? Austin said, if the speed limits are 15 miles per hour and people are going 15, then it is safe for bikes and cars to drive in the Sharrow lanes together. But I don't remember what speeds the scooters are going at. Are they in that same ballpark, or are they significantly different speed-wise, so that they're like a different mode, like pedestrians are a different mode?
They max out at 15 miles an hour.
Okay, so Austin, in your opinion, is it safe to have scooters and bikes along with cars in a 15 mile per hour road?
Yes.
Yeah, and hearing that, I personally, I'd agree. Hearing that, the idea of taking out a lane for a buffered bike lane sounds really nice. Also sounds really expensive. I don't love that idea as much anymore, because if we can do two things, in my opinion, if we can bring the speed down, so any user is comfortable in the lane, and if we can improve access from the street to a bicycle or scooter parking location, not the horrible ones that are there now that a lot of us have seen probably. In my opinion, if we could solve those two problems, it would be the best case and lowest cost scenario. The idea of taking out a lane for a buffered bike lane sounds really, really great for bikes and scooters, but all of that parking and through traffic with only one lane feels like a recipe for disaster for the businesses. And I do believe that bikes and scooters having better access will support the businesses significantly also. But, imagine the drive aisle in the Walmart parking lot was also a through aisle for 10,000 cars a day, which is half what's there now. It just scares me of what the result could be. So I still don't know, but that's what I'm chewing on.
A question that go ahead.
Okay, like in Salt Lake City, we have that green pavement, right? That's shared lane. Could we make like an outside lane? We have two lanes, so not the median, the curbside lane, shared lane, painted as green, where bicyclists doesn't have to drive on the side of the lane. They can drive in the middle, and the scooters also. So with that, automobile drivers have to slow down in that way, right? Salt Lake has that green lane, completely shared lane.
Yeah, but I think that's only with the one lane. One lane is through traffic, not two going up.
Yeah, I mean the two lanes. Outside lane shared green paint. Median lane is for the cars.
So Dr. Sato, a green painted bike is its actual lane. So it needs
lane. Yeah,
it has to be separated from the actual vehicle lane.
Why?
That is, what's that?
Why? Because Salt Lake does have shared lane, shared by car and bicycles. And the bicycle has the same right to use that green lane. They can drive in the middle of the lane, not on the side. And the vehicles have to, in a way, yield to their speed, so they have to follow.
What street is that on?
Main Street downtown.
300 South or 400 South?
I don't know what street, but I've seen it too. But
there are.
It's an interesting question because legally the scooter and bike can already be there.
Correct.
The green paint would serve to reinforce the message that, hey,
reinforce the message.
Yeah.
It's like the roundabout. Bicycle has the same right to use the lane. Bicycle doesn't have to drive on the side of the lane in the roundabout. So actually, bicyclists, always think about they have to drive on the edge of the lane, but in the roundabout, they have the right to use that one lane. So it's the same idea.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, if you have two lanes, unfortunately, the median lane, those who are driving in the middle lane may not follow the speed limit and go a bit faster.
Right.
So it's kind of dangerous there.
Mm.
But what? Yeah, Xian, why don't you ask your friend in Salt Lake City, see how that kind of arrangement is performing?
Yeah, it'd be interesting. It sounds, Austin, if I'm understanding your message in the chat, that Super Shero, the green lane, was a trial and was not accepted. So green paint in the lane is now for bike only lanes specifically.
Yep.
And again, that's
exactly
what I
right.
That's
they were
what I
ordered
recall.
To let it fade.
Again, that's what I recall. And I'm trying to research the information on it. I want to make sure I'm factual, but that's what I'm recalling.
So even if
it was a trial period test to see if it could be adopted.
Mm-hmm. Even if green paint's not on the table, the general point is that if we can emphasize that bikes and scooters are going to be present there and expected there, that could help for drivers to be more aware and careful. Dave, Dave Arnold, you were about.
Yeah, I was just, so the discussion's been around getting the speed down. I know that, again, I'm not a commuter bicyclist, so I don't have the experience of being on the road, so I'd like some feedback. But we have diagonal parking on both sides. And I know that diagonal parking and bicycles don't mix very well. So if we solve the speed problem, is the diagonal parking, because it's not even diagonal parking on just one lane, there's diagonal parking on, I just brought it up on Google just to make sure my memory's right. We have diagonal parking on both sides of these streets. And so if we solve the speed issue, are we going to remain with people not being comfortable because of the diagonal parking of the drivers backing out in front of you, or is that really not an issue?
That's a great question, and I don't know. Yeah, any thoughts from anybody that I haven't experienced that when I've biked on Center Street, but it certainly could be a problem. Again, if the speeds are all low enough, then we would hope people can see and have enough time to react, but it doesn't. But I really don't know.
Okay.
Part of it is having the speeds low enough, but also if the bicyclists are comfortable taking the entire lane, they can be on the left side of the right lane, so they won't be hugging the bumpers of the cars that would be backing out into them. So that gives them the flexibility to move around if somebody does start to back out.
That's a good point. Yeah, Dave, Harding.
A couple thoughts on this. One, I'm a big proponent of reverse or diagonal parking. So basically, you back into the space and then you pull out. And I think that's an option here. And then one other thought. You've talked a lot about getting the speeds down. And I think the more that we can route people around Center Street, the more it's naturally going to be slower. And if it was more like a parking lot where it's not the through lanes and people get as close as they can on First North before dropping down to Center Street, I think if Center Street really feels like a parking lot that also has cyclists and scooters on it, I think people are naturally going to be going slower, and then it just alleviates a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, if I love the idea of the raised crosswalks because it slows cars down. It helps pedestrians feel safer. But I feel better about it if we can get 5,000 cars onto 100 North first and just bring the pure volume down first, or in conjunction with that. And I say 5,000 just as a random number. That's not from anything.
And I do know that Salt Lake actually, if I recall, on one of their streets, they actually move the bike lane next to the walking area, and the actual angled parking is in the street. So the bike lane is actually next to to the walk, and then you have that's separated in that path. So you're not backing out into bikes or scooters. I can't remember. I think it's 200. Is it 200 west in Salt Lake? But they do have that.
No, 300 south. I'm looking at the map.
Yeah. So again, there's so many options. Yeah, I mean, it's safety. If that's something that becomes something that needs to be looked at, absolutely.
Where did you say in Salt Lake that they do that? 300 south?
300 south. Yeah, bike lane is close to the pedestrian path, and then the parking is actually in the middle. There's angle parking, and along there is a parallel parking also.
Oh yeah, right, got it.
I'm curious to hear other people's thoughts on what me and Laurie brought up earlier. Let's ignore cost for a minute. Mm-hmm. The idea of removing a travel lane in favor of a bike lane that was between the sidewalk and parking. So it's a buffered bike lane that is not impacted by parking. I mean, I think obviously that would be an amazing situation for those on bikes and scooters, but I'm curious what others feel about the potential parking or traffic impacts of that.
Actually, if you don't consider the cost, median Center Street, currently we have this angle parking from both sides, right? Can you make it only the width required for one direction? No, one block, one direction, the other block, so you may lose almost 50% of the parking in near the median, but that extra space left can be made into bike path, just like the one you see in Salt Lake. Or even Center Street between, that's right, 100 East and 200 East. People don't like that, but there's a median parking, diagonal parking.
Yeah, the challenge I'm seeing, even in the Google, this is like a random time in the day, almost, I mean, the parking is highly occupied.
Right, yeah, that's an issue, but
I don't know, maybe if we look at the parking garages, and I mean, we definitely don't want to kill business downtown. We don't have a downtown, but.
Right.
And Doug, from Public Works Engineering, we're willing to put any concepts that TMAC would like us to put together. If that's a recommendation from TMAC, hey, this is the direction. We do have the kind of that Center Street that has all that list of everything. I think some of those things are on there. Like I said, we're willing to move down that path, put concepts, preliminary costs together. Those kind of things. We're willing to do trials. If you feel this is the right time to start doing trials and lane reductions, again, all that's on the table for those things. But yeah, there is a lot of different stakeholders, I can't say, for the uses of Center Street.
Yeah, if we took out the middle diagonal parking side, we take out a third of the parking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about
so if that would give enough.
lost 1/3 somewhere of park, off-street parking, that it might work. Like I'm looking at 300 South. It looks nice. It still have a nice, tree-lined center medium portion. The diagonal parking is just take turns. One portion, one direction, the other one, the other direction, but just enough space for in the way.
It looks like there's 22 parking spots per block in the center.
Yeah.
I counted them. If I counted right, it looks like there's about 20, on the order of just a little over 20 parking spots. So we'd be trading probably something like that off for improving the. There'd still be, it looks like there'd be on the order of still probably close to 35 to 40 parking spots per block. I don't know if, and it's not quite that bad because it looks like we have some turn lanes that's taken up some of that. Looks like the interior, I don't know. I wonder if part of it could be doing a parking analysis to see if we move 20 cars off of parking per block, if that's really going to affect downtown business, if those move to parking garages or something.
It'd be helpful for me to see a picture at some point of what Dr. Saito was describing. I'm having a hard time with this one since I'm not in the industry like everybody else.
Yeah, even if you could just bring up our downtown Center Street and let everyone see the parking, even just Google Maps has typical parking during the day. And then you could take
But Clancy,
I can't share that, so somebody can maybe.
I can respond to your question, Clancy, about what if we had a bike lane between parking and the sidewalk. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, if someone could show us 3rd South downtown Salt Lake so we could visualize it, it's pretty easy to see.
Yeah, I'm not quite following.
I'm sharing here. Sorry, I don't know Salt Lake.
Yeah, just type in 300 South Salt Lake.
Yeah, it's 300 South and just go along it and you'll see it really quick.
Where are we talking here? Is this the right spot? We've got the bike lanes here with the green indicators.
Yeah, if you slide, like right there. See that right there?
Right.
Okay, so
you have a bike lane on the.
So what they did is they went to parallel parking on the sides and kept their middle diagonal.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Scooters would be much more likely to use that.
You go to 200 West, they've got angled parking on the outside.
Oh, do they?
Let's see. Is that West Temple? Sorry, I'm not. Okay, here we go. Oh yeah, but and not the middle.
Right there.
Oh yeah.
See, I love the feel of this because it's non-vehicle users all right next to the sidewalk where, they can, if you're on a bike or scooter, you can stop anywhere and walk up to the rack and just start walking. But then I go back and I'm like, well, if we can just slow people down and they're comfortable in the lane, why go to all the expense of doing this? Is it necessary? Is it that much better? I don't have an opinion yet. That's just what I keep.
I don't know if I have an opinion yet exactly what it was. If we're ignoring cost, then I think this is great because bikes and scooters have a protected place. I think about it as a perspective of I do a lot of biking around Provo with my young children as much as we can, but no way would I bring them down to Center Street to share a lane, even if there was 15 miles per hour. Absolutely not. We can't go down to Center Street with my family on bikes. We can't share lane. I don't trust the cars to watch out for my kids. Absolutely not. But if it were a protected lane, we could go. For the scooters, I think a lot of those, I don't know, but maybe a lot of the scooter users are scooting and then hopping out to a business and hopping back on and moving again. So it would make sense for their lane to be close to the sidewalk and not have to negotiate through the parking to get to a place, where they can stop, like you talked about, Clancy. One lane of traffic on Center Street. Oh, excuse me, one lane of where cars can go, going down to one lane, wouldn't bother me, as long as, like Dave Harding said, and I've said from the beginning, I always say it has to be a dual solution of reducing cars on Center Street and traffic, and also giving the through traffic somewhere to go. And if we do that, then by all means, let's have one lane, because the businesses want cars to be able to come in when they're, coming to pick up, take out dinner or something, and then head home again. Great, they can still get there. I don't know that we need 2 lanes of car traffic if that's the purpose of the lane of car traffic, as long as the commuters have somewhere else to go. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I agree.
We'll definitely need to work with the Downtown Alliance or whatever, because they'll have strong opinions about this. Yeah.
Yeah, and they know it much better than I do, and I welcome their input. I'm not demanding this. I'm just thinking out loud.
Can I give a two? Oh, realize my mic's not down. Can I give a maybe a 2-minute idea of something that I have been taking a look at that could be an alternative here?
I want to hear it real quick. Robert Mills, can we bump our item 4 to next month, or do we need to absolutely hear that one today?
That's a Rob Hunter question.
It would be fine to bump. That's another probably 2-minute. That's a very short discussion item, not a long discussion item. Okay, but so whichever way you want to do it.
Let's hear your idea for Center Street, Rob, and then see if we can fit it at the Southwest stuff at the end.
Okay, so I'm about to share my screen. Is that all right if I take over the? Okay, so another idea to think about is, I guess in my mind, my 2 cents is that there's kind of 2 things that we need to think about on Center Street when it comes to bike and scooter traffic. Part of it is how much of it is just coming here to Center Street to do something on Center Street, and also figuring out a through path in this general downtown area, a bike path to do east-west bike traffic. And potentially there's plus and minuses to all of them. This is not, I'm trying to push people away from using necessarily Center Street as the through or do something that you're talking about as an alternative. Another thing to think about is that we already have the downtown plan has a plan right now for 100 South. Right now 100 South does have bike lanes on it. In terms of making this a bicycle focal point, there's one plus, I guess, that it doesn't have the same, it's not going to have the same controversy as Center Street in terms of taking off parking or things like that. The other plus is that this could be a focal point or an east-west path. And if we put them on here, we could create bicycle parking spots that are just off to the side of the street, to where if they're coming to downtown, there's, I think our street section right now in the downtown master plan is something like a 30-foot. If we maybe took up some of that with a bicycle track similar to what we're talking about, put a 2-lane on one side or the other, then we could create spots. Just kind of using this as an example, if this was a landscape area, we could do landscape between the bicycle lanes and the bigger kind of promenade pedestrian area. Maybe take up some of that with the bicycle track, but then in the areas in between, we could have this nice landscaping, and then have little sections where you could park your bike in that area and then go walk off to Center Street. In terms of connectivity, the pluses are that 100 South does connect into 100 West, which is going to be our main northwest active transportation corridor, because that connects all the way down to the pedestrian bridge that we're putting into the transit station. Obviously, on the minus, it doesn't go straight through because of the temple grounds. So there are pluses and minuses to making it that, but right now it does have bicycle lanes. We could look at, and potentially do a protected 2-way bike lane without quite the controversy and the problems that we have on Center Street. So anyways, just throwing that out there as another idea. The other thing too is, as I'm thinking going west, specifically, our section of Center Street, we could make that the connector. We need to work with UDOT to see how we figure out bicycle facilities continuing down on Center in the future, where if we put it on 100 South, we have control over that. And that's a much lower volume, potentially much safer place to put it. So it's not on Center Street, which I know in the downtown area, Center Street is going to be the focus, but it's another idea to think about.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing that might solve the bicycle issue if we treat a bicycle like a car and it's coming to downtown. Javin, I think that's your name, right? When Javin showed us the heat map of the scooters, it was very clear that there's interest all the way along Center Street, all the way to the park. So it was roughly a 5-block area. And I think that's something we want to continue to encourage is people to use that entire 5-block area. And I think scooters are moving them. We're getting people up and down that. It's going to activate that entire area. So one thing that really hit me when he showed that heat map is how scooters are using it. So just something, if you didn't make that connection when he showed you the heat map, there's really something about scooters. They're doing something to move people through this area, because as you get further away from University, Center Street just kind of dies. And one thing that scooter heat map showed me is we might be able to extend our downtown all the way to where the new city building is and into that park if we do it right, and we could get a bigger downtown area, more active, and more places for our businesses to be. So that heat map really hit me, Javin, when you put that up there.
I have a quick response to what Rob was showing us. I think we might, with talking about bikes, we might be talking about two separate functions. The one is the bike commuter traffic that goes through, and they're going to need a really direct route, and maybe 100 South is great for that. But if we're talking about Center Street as a destination, as the place people want to go, it'd be so fun to say, hey kids, let's go down on a Saturday morning and go get kolaches, right? But I need to be able to feel safe coming to Center Street as a destination, which is different than like my husband who bikes to work every day, and that's like a different usage. So we might want to consider both, like a bike thoroughfare somewhere, but also what about bikes actually on Center Street for people who are coming to Center Street and not just passing through Provo? So it's two different questions.
Yeah, I agree, Joy. It's almost two types of situations.
So what you said was that the commuters are very similar to what Joy just described, or the scooters and what Joy just described is very similar. Clancy, what you're describing is the commuter, and they're using the facilities very differently, or would use the facilities very differently.
Yeah, and I think what Rob explained could serve that commuter, but probably wouldn't serve the destination biker.
Right. Okay.
It could, right? We could take 100 South and park our bikes and walk a block. That wouldn't kill us. But if we keep talking about, hey, Center Street is the destination, is the place to be, we want people having this beautiful downtown aesthetic and moving around, I visualize that more like, hey, let's have a cute little bike lane for scooters and bikes so they can come and be there. I visualize that differently. Yeah. That's all.
I want to go ahead and wrap up before our time ends here. I think we will bump item 4, the Southwest Area Active Plan, to next month, if that's okay, Rob. Sorry about that. And then next month, item 3 we talked about indirectly, but I think next month we'll maybe have sort of a final vote on those 4 criteria. I think we'd all emailed and we like what we have, but it'd probably be a good thing to vote on so it's official. And maybe we can continue on these Center Street ideas and maybe even get to some interim ideas like Shane suggested, and suggest a few temporary measures to test some of this out. Maybe we can get to that discussion next month. So
just before we leave the topic, I'm wondering, is there a way we could get Gavin to go to the Downtown Alliance and make sure they know what the scooters are doing, and see if that changes their ideas about parking or anything? Do they realize maybe there's this new mode of moving up and down Center? Because they've come in and make presentations to us. Maybe some of the information we could get to them in the interim and get them thinking about it.
I'm positive that he shared it with Quinn, and I'll ask him to do that again, David.
Okay.
Great
thanks.
suggestion.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll go ahead and adjourn for today. Thanks for the discussion and comments, everybody.
Right.
Thanks, everyone.